What if the worst thing that ever happened to you was actually the beginning of everything you ever wanted? You call it failure. You call it misfortune. You call it bad luck, sabotage, maybe even punishment. But what if I told you it was none of those things? What if it was a door just dressed as a wall? In my life and in the lives of every successful man I ever studied, I noticed one pattern repeat itself with mathematical precision. Opportunity almost never introduces itself dressed in comfort. It comes dressed in loss, in delay, in heartbreak, in public embarrassment, in private despair. But if you do not run, if you remain just long enough to look deeper, you'll see the hand of fate pointing you forward. Because the universe is not cruel, it is clever, and it only reveals its gifts to those brave enough to search for them within the ashes. That's why I wrote, opportunity often comes disguised in the form of misfortune or temporary defeat. So I ask you, that thing that broke you, are you sure it didn't birth you? Let me tell you a story I've never shared in full. Not in my lectures, not in my books, not even in quiet conversation with the men I mentored. It's a story about a man who lost everything. His name was Matthew Quinn. At 32, Matthew was a rising star, vice president at a firm on Wall Street, Ivy League background, tailored suits, calendars booked 3 months out. He had mastered the game, at least the one others told him to play. But then it happened, a market collapse, a scandal he didn't cause but couldn't escape, a decision from the board. We have to let you go. And just like that, status, salary, structure, gone. He called it the worst day of his life. What he didn't know, it was actually the best. This is the mechanism of the problem. Most people are taught to believe success is a ladder. You climb up rung by rung, and anything that makes you fall must be failure. But the truth is this: life is not a ladder, it's a labyrinth. And in a labyrinth, wrong turns are necessary. Dead ends teach direction. But Matthew didn't know that yet. So he spiraled. He drank. He isolated. He cursed the market, the firm, the world. He told himself, it's over. Until one night, while digging through old boxes in his apartment, he found a letter. It was one he had written to himself years earlier during a personal development retreat. If I ever forget why I came here, to create, to help, to build, I want this to remind me. You were not born to maintain systems. You were born to create them. He stared at the letter for a long time, and something broke open. Or perhaps something finally began. This was the turning point. Matthew stopped asking, why did this happen to me? And started asking, what is this here to make possible? That question, though simple, changed everything. He took stock, not of his bank account, but of his gifts, his passions, his frustrations with the system he once served. He realized he had spent years performing a version of himself, but never becoming who he truly was. This is the mechanism of function. Misfortune, defeat, breakdowns. These are not ends. They are invitations. Invitations to reevaluate, to realign, to return to purpose. Every great man I ever studied, Ford, Edison, Carnegie, they all had a moment of collapse. But what separated them from the masses was not intelligence. It was interpretation. They saw the fire not as destruction, but as refinement. Because life does not punish. It repurposes. Matthew began working again, but not for a firm. For himself, he started writing, blog posts at first, then essays, then a small book. He shared his story, not as a victim, but as a blueprint for others. He helped laid-off workers reinvent themselves. He coached executives through purpose transitions. He created a framework he called the Collapse Catalyst, and companies paid thousands to bring him in. In 3 years, he built a new empire. But this time, it wasn't built on illusion. It was built on meaning. This is the mechanism of solution. You do not rebuild your life by pretending nothing happened. You rebuild by letting what happened refine who you become. Temporary defeat is not the opposite of success. It is often the midwife of it. The pain is not the problem. The meaning you give it, that's where your power lives. I wrote in Think and Grow Rich. Every adversity, every failure, every heartache carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. But only those who search the ashes ever find it. So let me ask you, what have you called misfortune that might have actually been instruction? What defeat did you mourn that might have been design? And what breakdown have you survived that might have been your rebirth? You don't need to know the answer now. You only need to stop running from the question, because buried beneath your worst day is something the world desperately needs. You, rebuilt, redefined, and ready. And that, my friend, is not misfortune. That is destiny, disguised. Opportunity never knocks the way you expect it. It doesn't wear a suit and tie. It doesn't carry a banner with your name on it. And it never arrives at the right time. More often than not, it shows up when you're least prepared to see it, disguised as disaster. Let me tell you about a man named David Mercer. David was an architect, not just by profession, but by identity. He built things, skyscrapers, stadiums, bridges. But one thing he never built was himself. He followed the blueprint others handed him. He built his father's dream, his mentor's company, his client's visions, until one day, a miscalculation during a government-funded project led to a partial structural collapse. No one was hurt, but reputations were. David's firm took the fall. He lost his license. His savings were drained in legal battles. He went from keynote speaker at engineering conferences to delivering groceries in a beat-up sedan. He called it rock bottom. And yet, rock bottom is often where real foundations are finally poured. This is the mechanism of the problem. Most people think failure is the end of the story, but in truth, it is the middle, and often the most honest part. David had been successful, but it wasn't his success. He was living by borrowed blueprints. He had mastered the measurements of the external world, but ignored the dimensions of his own inner world. It took collapse for him to see he had never actually designed his own life. For 2 years, David disappeared from the world he once ruled. But during that disappearance, he began the real construction, not of buildings, but of belief. He studied philosophy, psychology, and personal development. He journaled obsessively. He asked questions most men never dare face. Who am I without a title? What is a life worth building? And who must I become to build it? He didn't have answers right away, but he had something better. He had the courage to keep asking. Slowly, brick by brick, David began rebuilding. Not the old structure, a new one. He became a mentor for young architects, teaching not just design, but resilience. He started a podcast called The Inner Blueprint, where he interviewed builders, not of buildings, but of identity. And the irony? He became more influential after the collapse than he ever was before it. This is the mechanism of the solution. Collapse doesn't end you. It introduces you to the part of you you forgot. The part that wasn't designed by society or school or systems. The part that's been quietly waiting for everything to fall away so it could finally rise. I once wrote, "Before success comes in any man's life, he is sure to meet with much temporary defeat and perhaps some failure. When defeat overtakes a man, the easiest and most logical thing to do is to quit. That is exactly what the majority of men do. But you are not the majority. You are not here to quit. You are here to rise. And rising doesn't always look like winning. Sometimes it looks like crawling. Sometimes it looks like crying. Sometimes it looks like rewriting the entire story you were told about what success is supposed to be. Because here's the truth. You weren't born to obey blueprints. You were born to design them. You were not meant to fit into someone else's mold. You were meant to shatter it. Your life is not a ladder. It's not a resume. It's not a highlight reel. Your life is a construction site, messy, loud, unfinished. But if you stay on the job long enough, if you keep showing up even when the wind knocks your scaffolding down, you will build something unshakable. And that is the one thing you were always supposed to control. Not the world, not other people, not outcomes. Your meaning, your response, your identity. That's where your power lives. And no collapse, no matter how brutal, can ever take that from you, unless you let it. I remember writing, "When riches begin to come, they come so quickly in such great abundance that one wonders where they have been hiding during all those lean years." But what I didn't write then, what I will tell you now, is this. The riches were never hiding. You were. Hiding behind fear, behind expectations, behind roles you never chose but somehow inherited. That's what David Mercer realized. He didn't just lose his license, he lost his camouflage. And once it was stripped away, he finally saw himself, not as a failure, but as a free man, free to build differently, free to dream without blueprints, free to create without permission. He became an advocate for architects and engineers navigating career transitions. He launched a podcast, Design from Within. He helped thousands reimagine not just their work, but their worth. He was no longer constructing buildings. He was constructing lives. And the collapse? It was the catalyst, not the curse. This is the mechanism of mastery. Once you've been stripped of everything false, every title, every mask, every illusion, what remains is real. Most men never meet themselves. They meet their resume. They meet their reputation. They meet the expectations others built around them. But to meet your real self, that takes collapse. That takes the kind of silence only failure can teach. Because when the noise is gone, you finally hear what's true. And David, he listened. He began mentoring, not from a podium, but from experience. Not with theories, but with scars. He taught people how to rebuild when the plans go up in flames. And he proved something I've known all my life. You don't need to be perfect to lead. You need to be honest. In fact, the most powerful transformations I've ever witnessed came not from polished men with perfect track records, but from broken men who decided to rise anyway. That's the lesson. You are not here to maintain your mask. You are here to outgrow it. Because greatness never arrives wearing what it wore yesterday. It comes through the fire. So let me ask you now, what are you calling a breakdown? That might actually be a breakthrough? What title, job, relationship, or role have you lost that may have actually been the weight keeping you from rising? What door slammed shut that was never meant to open again? I wrote in Think and Grow Rich, there comes with every experience of temporary defeat and every failure and every form of adversity the seed of an equivalent advantage. But the seed is not the tree. It doesn't hand you fruit. It hands you potential. And potential only becomes power if you plant it, if you water it, if you trust it. David did. Matthew did. So did every name you admire on magazine covers or history books. They didn't avoid failure. They outgrew it. They used it as fuel. Because collapse is not your enemy. It is the clean slate. It's where the old version of you dies and the real one begins. And maybe that's what's happening to you right now. Maybe life isn't punishing you. Maybe it's preparing you, not for survival, but for sovereignty, not to reclaim your past, but to redesign your future. You are not here to play small. You are not here to live in someone else's version of success. You are here to awaken. And sometimes awakening feels like everything is falling apart. But it's not falling apart. It's falling into place. So let me leave you with this. When the dust settles, when the crowd quiets, when the applause ends and the awards fade, what remains? You. Not the man they told you to be, not the mask you once believed was you, but the man forged in the fire, the one who lost everything false and found everything true, the one who didn't just survive collapse. He used it. He met himself in the ashes. and built something the world could never take away, a life rooted in purpose. That is power. Now we turn toward the final act, because once the ashes settle and the man is rebuilt, not just restored, but reimagined, there remains one thing left to do, to declare it, because what good is becoming if you don't claim it? You've walked through the fire, you've rewritten the blueprint, but now it's time to draw the line, to decide once and for all that you will never again betray who you've become for the comfort of who you used to be. This is the mechanism of integration, the decision to no longer flirt with the old self, the courage to say, I am no longer becoming, I am arrived, and to live as that man, consistently, boldly, with finality. In my private journals, I once wrote, until a man commits, he is split in half, torn between past and future, identity and illusion, truth and role. But commitment unifies. It takes every piece you've gathered, every pain you've faced, every truth you've claimed, and welds it into something unshakable, a self that cannot be moved. So ask yourself this, have you truly decided? Or are you still visiting the new you while living with the old? Because the world doesn't respond to your hopes. It responds to your standards, and your standards are visible in every action, every word, every boundary you enforce. So write the line, burn the script, stand in the center of the identity you earned, and declare, this is who I am now. Not because it's trending, not because it's easy, but because it's true. You were broken, now you are whole. You were confused, now you are clear. You were hiding, now you are visible. This is the man the world was waiting for, and now he has arrived. But don't think for a second that the journey ends here, because the moment you claim a new identity, life will test it, not to punish you, but to prove you. You will face moments where your old self whispers, just go back, play it safe, shrink. And in those moments, you must remember, you didn't come this far to betray your becoming. You didn't walk through fire just to kneel before fear again. You didn't collapse just to rebuild the same house. You are different now. Your nervous system has new wiring. Your spirit has new clarity. Your future has new orders. So don't look back, because there is nothing for you there. You've outgrown the version of life that could be shaken by hardship. You've outgrown the identity that needed permission to act. You've outgrown the belief that failure was final. You've seen too much, felt too deeply, risen too far. Now is the moment to lead, not with arrogance, but with alignment, not by shouting, but by embodying. Because your presence will now speak louder than your past ever could. This is the real prize of collapse. You don't just get clarity, you become clarity. And when people see you, they won't just see survival, they'll see sovereignty. So I ask you right here, right now, will you go back to who you were, or will you live as who you are? Because the world doesn't need another perfect mask. It needs the man who walked through ruin and returned with gold in his hands. It needs the man who no longer waits, who no longer asks, who no longer wonders if he's enough, because he knows. He knows that everything that once looked like misfortune was actually the making of him. And now he does not dream, he does not hope, he acts. Because fire taught him who he is. Collapse revealed what he's here to build. And the crown is not given. It is claimed. Most people never reach this stage. They stop when it gets hard. They stop when it gets quiet. They stop when it gets lonely. But not you. You stayed through the silence. You listened through the fire. You rewired your identity. And now the world will try to make sense of you. They'll ask, how did he come back stronger? How did he rise from that? They'll wonder what book you read, what program you followed, what secret you discovered, and they won't understand when you say, there was no book, no secret, no guru, just a choice to stop running and start becoming. Because that's the truth. You didn't escape the pain. You transformed through it. That is what few are willing to do. Most want the crown without carrying the cross. They want the title without walking the fire. But not you. You walked it. And now you wear the scars like armor. You speak differently now, not louder, but clearer, not to convince others, but to remind yourself of who you are. You move differently, with certainty, not because you know all the steps, but because you trust the next one will appear when you take it. That's faith, not belief in outcomes, but belief in yourself. This is what separates men of destiny from men of distraction. One keeps circling the pain, the other moves through it and comes out forged. Let the world call it mystery. You know it was decision. Let them call it talent. You know it was transformation. Let them call it luck. You know it was leadership of the highest kind, self-leadership. And here's what's even more powerful. Now you become the guide, not because you're perfect, but because you've walked the terrain most fear to cross. You are no longer seeking validation. You are now offering direction, because what once broke you now builds others. And what once confused you now clarifies the path for someone else. You've become the proof that the fall is not final, that pain is not punishment, that collapse is not the end, but the invitation. And when others meet their breakdown, they will remember your rise. Because greatness is not how high you climbed, it's how deep you went when everything collapsed. And now you stand, not as a survivor, but as a man reborn. So here you are. You made it through, not just to the end of this video, but through a truth most people will spend a lifetime avoiding. That what breaks you often births you. You've walked with me through ashes, ruin, and silence. You've witnessed the blueprint hidden beneath collapse. And you've seen what I've seen, that every misfortune, every failure, every collapse is not a tomb, but a temple in disguise. Most people stop the moment it gets uncomfortable, but you didn't. You stayed. And that tells me everything I need to know about you. You are not here to survive. You are here to reclaim. You, my friend, are one of the few who look pain in the eye and say, this will not end me. This will define me. The few who choose growth, even when it's not easy. The few who understand that evolution isn't a reward, it's a responsibility. So here's what I invite you to do. Subscribe to this channel, not for entertainment, but for alignment. Turn on the notifications, because every new message might be the one that brings you home to your next level. And tell me in the comments, what part of your life has collapsed? And what might it be trying to build through you? Above all, remember this. Don't just think and grow rich. Collapse and rise wise, because you weren't made to be untouched by hardship. You were made to turn hardship into your crown. I'll see you at the top.